Picture this. It's Halloween night. You're walking down the street, surrounded by kids in store-bought plastic masks that they can barely breathe through. Michael Jackson's Thriller echoes faintly from a distant boombox. You're holding a white pillowcase in one hand because, let's be real, who needed a fancy trick-or-treat bag? And the night is bursting with spooky magic. That was Halloween in the 1980s. Effortlessly spooky with just the right amount of fun. Those 10 years were the peak of Halloween holiday culture because let's be honest, Halloween these days, it's fun and all, but it just can't top the 80s. From the costumes that had every kid competing for neighborhood Halloween legend to the horror movies that kept us up way past our bedtimes, Halloween in the 80s had a vibe that'll never be replicated. So whether you lived through it or you're just looking for some good old retro nostalgia, you've found the right video. Today, we're going back in time to the spookiest decade of them all. Let's kick things off by talking about the vibe. You see, Halloween in the 80s was so much more than a holiday. For weeks leading up to the big night, everyone was buzzing about it. It was like there was this electric current running through the air, making everything feel alive. Not the kind of alive where you'd expect zombies to pop out of the ground, but the fun kind. Well, maybe a little of both. Now here's where it gets good. If you didn't grow up in the 80s, you might not know this, but everyone got in on the action. Parents, teachers, literally everyone caught the Halloween bug. Even that grumpy old neighbor who never talked to anyone would somehow transform their front yard into a full-blown graveyard. Parents helped their children pick out the perfect Halloween costume and even paid for any extra materials needed to make the costume work. Speaking of costumes, those were one of the best parts of 80s Halloween. I'm talking big, bold, and very uncomfortable. If you grew up in the 80s, you know exactly what I mean when I say uncomfortable. Plastic masks were a major part of everyone's costumes, and I'm convinced they were instruments of torture invented by some secret organization. With those monstrosities on, you could only see 4 steps in front of you. Breathing was an Olympic sport, but man, did you feel like a superhero. Or maybe a Ghostbuster. Or a Smurf. The coolest kids even got to be rainbow bright. But here's the thing, a store-bought costume wasn't your only option. Nope, not even close. If your family was anything like mine, we loved a good DIY challenge. I still remember struggling to cut the perfect hole into my favorite white bedsheet for the classic ghost costume. And if you had a cardboard box and some foil left over from Easter dinner, congratulations, you just became a robot. It was all about what you could make with what you had. Our costumes were never chosen at random either. Pop culture defined what everyone wanted to be. Movies, TV shows, and cartoons were our costume goldmines. Freddy Krueger, Jason, and Star Wars characters rocked the 1980s Halloween seasons. Every kid wanted to be Luke Skywalker, and if you somehow convinced your parents to buy you a lightsaber, you were instantly the coolest kid on the block. Now, let's talk about something that made Halloween in the 80s extra special, the movies. Horror movies in the 80s were nothing like the watered-down productions of today. They were wild. We can't talk about 1980s Halloween without mentioning iconic films like Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, or Friday the 13th. Those movies were beyond scary. We watched them with enthusiasm during the day and went to bed with dread at night. I remember being so scared to go into the basement after watching Evil Dead. Our entire Halloween celebration was shaped by the horror movies we watched. Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, those guys were practically part of the Halloween tradition. Every street had at least one Freddy Krueger on Halloween night. There's something about watching a scary movie in the 80s that today's streaming services just can't match. Back then, we had to rent VHS tapes from the video store. Yeah, we actually had to leave the house. And after watching Freddy terrorize teens for 90 minutes, we had the real horror of rewinding the tape before returning it. TV shows also jumped on the Halloween bandwagon. Every TV show from The Simpsons to Roseanne had its own Halloween special. They were annual must-watch events for every family. Halloween just felt bigger back then. It was on every screen, everywhere you looked. All right. Let's move on to one of the most exciting parts of 80s Halloween, trick-or-treating. This was serious business back then. Kids would roam the neighborhood, probably without a single adult in sight, armed with nothing but a pillowcase and an unending thirst for candy. And trust me, we didn't have any fancy store-bought trick-or-treat bags. Nope, we had pillowcases, because we were ready for a serious candy haul. When it came to treats, there were some clear favorites: Fun Dip, Pixie Sticks, Pop Rocks, and candy cigarettes, because why not give children candy that made them look like they were smoking, had every kid dreaming. But of course, there were always a few houses that gave out toothbrushes, or worse, apples. I'm still a little bitter about that. 80s Halloween decorations were intense. Haunted houses in people's garages, giant fake spider webs covering bushes, carved pumpkins on every porch. Every house had its own special kind of spookiness. And the most amazing part, everything was DIY. Nobody was out here spending money on fancy store-bought decorations. Oh no, if you wanted a haunted house, you made it. And it was probably with whatever random stuff you found lying around the house. Old sheets became ghosts, cardboard boxes turned into tombstones, and that creepy scarecrow in the yard, definitely stuffed with last week's newspaper. The creativity didn't stop there. Neighbors went all out. You could guarantee that someone on your street would turn their garage into a haunted house, complete with homemade props like cotton ball cobwebs that somehow always got stuck in your hair. We made spooky skeletons from PVC pipes. Honestly, half the fun was seeing just how over the top people could get with the little they had. Don't even get me started on the lighting. A lot of people didn't have elaborate lighting setups, but that didn't stop them from going for that eerie glow. Flashlights were placed under jack-o'-lanterns, and if someone was feeling extra fancy, they might use those orange and purple string lights. Street lights mixed with homemade lanterns to give everything that perfect, dimly lit, spooky but still fun feel. There was this raw energy to it all. Everything felt handmade, like the whole neighborhood was in on one giant Halloween art project. Every year, it was a competition to see whose yard could be the most terrifying, the most creative, or let's be honest, the most ridiculous. And that's what made it special. It was a community effort, and that's something you just don't see as much these days. Let's not forget the parties. Halloween parties in the 80s were on a whole other level. Whether it was a classroom party or a neighborhood event, everyone dressed up, played games, and went all out. You could never predict whose mom was going to turn their garage into a haunted house or serve the most terrifying, but delicious, Halloween-themed snacks. Remember those block parties? Entire neighborhoods would become horror central on Halloween night. Kids running around with their faces painted, adults competing over whose haunted garage was scarier. It felt like something out of a movie. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Even though Halloween today has all these new tricks and treats, the 80s keep showing us that they are still alive and well when October rolls around. I mean, look at how much 80s nostalgia is everywhere, especially in pop culture. If you've seen Stranger Things, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The 80s influence on today's Halloween culture is strong. From the costumes, to the horror movies, to the music. While Halloween decorations have changed since then, the magic of the 80s still lingers in every jack-o'-lantern and every neighborhood haunted house. You'll still see people rocking those classic Freddy Krueger masks, Michael Myers jumpsuits, and Ghostbuster costumes today. The 80s just had this special touch that still inspires how we celebrate now. And if this video has you really feeling the 80s vibe, why not channel your inner 80s kid this year? Dust off your old VHS player, throw on a slasher flick, wear that plastic mask, and pull together a DIY costume with whatever you've got lying around. It's what any 80s kid would have done. Do you agree that Halloween in the 1980s was the spookiest of all, or need some more convincing? Whatever side you're on, there's no denying that the 80s had a special magic when it came to Halloween. The creativity, the fun, and even the fear made Halloween back then a truly unforgettable experience. And while today's Halloweens have their charm, there's something about the simplicity and DIY spirit of the 80s that makes it impossible to top. But don't just take my word for it. Relive it for yourself. Whether you're planning on dressing up like your favorite 80s character or binge-watching horror classics, there are so many ways to give this year's Halloween that 80s feel. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out other videos on the channel for more throwbacks. And hey, let me know your favorite part of Halloween in the 80s. I'll see you in the comments, unless, of course, Freddy gets you first. Happy haunting, my friends, and may your Halloween be totally gnarly.